Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are based from today. In the name of the Newbury Agile Group, I'd like to welcome you all. As I said, my name is Wilson Gavinji. I'm based in Newbury, UK, and it would be great if you could share in the comments where you are joining from today so that we can see what's the reach of the event. I know that we have many friends around the world, all thanks to COVID, where we expanded our reach. Um, as I said, I'm from Newbury. I'm a Scrum Master working in Vodafone, and I'm also the founder of this group, the Newbury Agile Group. Before I introduce to you our speaker, which you already know who is it, but I'd like to grab your attention to a few things to ensure we have a great session today, and also to recap our agenda. So let me just put this. This is the tricky part where I have to present things and share the screen and all that stuff. So share. Okay, I hope it's visible. Yeah. And so joining the Zoom call, which we're already in, we'll have now introduction and a quick icebreaker, just a few questions, and then we'll have Alan having the session and some Q&A, and we hopefully will be closing by 6:40. Now, as I said, please stay on mute. Anyways, I've already muted everyone, just so that that's a good experience for everyone. This session is being recorded. Pictures, the video recording will be made available into the social networks, which I'll share as well in our meetup page. There will be a Q&A at the end of the session. Please use the Sli.do that has been provided, and I will share again on the chat. Well, actually, we are going to use Sli.do for our poll just afterwards, and then you can use the Sli.do to put your questions there, upvote if you already see something that is similar. And by the end as well, I will share a feedback form so that we can gather how this went for you. Now, I'll stop sharing and I'll just ask you to join Slido. Let me just put the Slido, present. Okay, share again. So this is the Slido, slido.com. And the code is 044990. And we have just a few questions. It's anonymous. Nobody will know who you are. What's your answer? But the first question is, how familiar are you with OKRs? Now, being one, you never heard about it, and 10, you have used it successfully. Well, you could write a book just like Alan. Okay, we have a range of expertise in the session, which is good. There is no right or wrong answer. It's just good that it's quite spread across. So everyone has already heard about OKRs, so they know what they are, which is good. How many people do we have now? When I present Zoom, it takes away 29. Okay. Okay, so we have an average of 5.8. Now I'll just activate the next one, which is your organization's using OKR successfully. Now, what do I mean here by successfully? It's leadership including, are they also using OKRs? Is OKRs promoting alignment between different parts of organization, so it goes beyond your area or your team as well? So far, 22 responses, majority no, and then kind of, and then yes, 5%. And then finally, the next one is, in your opinion, what is the most critical aspect to succeed with OKRs? Let's see if we have here a convergence to something that everyone thinks about.
Love the way no idea and honesty have gone right together. No idea, honestly.
Okay, alignment, I think the big thing. Just wait for a few more answers. Alignment and no idea so far. We see as well senior management buy-in. Okay, so far alignment and no idea is winning. Very good. So this was just a quick icebreaker to get everyone in in the right mindset of OKRs and getting into the topic. So please do not close the window of Slido. You'll be able to use the Q&A there to put your questions. You can always upvote some if some you see there that is existing, and we'll cover as much as possible at the end of the session after the presentation. So let me just stop sharing my screen and stop this. Okay. And, and with this, I'd like to introduce Allan. Now, Allan, it's the second time that he's been with us here here at the Newbury Agile Group. The last time was the first and last time was in July 2020. The recording is available at the YouTube at my YouTube channel. You can always review. The topic at that time was about no evolution from no project to continuous digital, which again are some of the books that Allan has written. My favorite is the project Myopia so far, because it explains really well. It's a critique, as Allan says, it's a critique. It doesn't offer any solution that comes with a continuous digital, but it's really nice to understand why the project model is doomed to fail. And with that, Allan, please introduce yourself. Talk about what have you been doing since then.
Uh, Thank you, Wilson. Thank you. What have I been doing since July? Mainly sitting around my house, like I think most of you have as well. And I kind of feel as though I'm kind of waking up from the last year, and I'm not quite sure what I did with it. I know I worked with a few clients, but I must admit the last year is a bit of a haze to me. Well, thank you for having me back anyway. One thing I have done in the last year is write a book. Which is what this presentation is based on, which I think you already know. Let me pull the screen up here. And as I was writing the book, it's interesting. One of the little secrets about being an author and writing a book is that you learn more than your audience do reading the book. In putting your ideas together, in expressing them, in learning to share and thinking through what you're trying to say, you often get insights you didn't realize you had. And I think as I was bringing the book to a close, it really came back to me that OKRs have the potential to relight something in Agile. They allow for a style of Agile we perhaps haven't seen for a few years, or perhaps we've never seen before. But I think there's a potential in here to do something very special. And that's why this presentation's entitled Reawakening Agile with OKRs. And it kind of carries on from where the book left off. The book itself, Succeeding with OKRs and Agile. I'm going to give away 2 copies at the end of this presentation. One will be an ebook and the other will be a signed copy, and I will post it anywhere in the world, including if the person who's dialed in from South Africa he wins it, or those of you in Toronto or the US. If you go to my website and put in your name and email address, at the end I'll pull a name out of the hat, as it were, and I'll send out a couple of copies. This book comes from my own experience. Back in 2008, I was working with a well-known financial institution, shall we say, and we'll leave it at that. And they decided to add OKRs to their Agile transformation. And I knew about OKRs, I'd read about them, I knew a bit, but suddenly I was dropped into using them a lot. And looking at the results there we had from the polls, I suspect the same is true for many of you. I noticed there was a cluster of people down at the low end, and I suspect, like myself, you're suddenly being exposed to them and maybe even being asked to use them. It was also interesting on the poll we had there that alignment came up with the big success factor. Let me throw that back at you and pose a question. Is alignment a success factor for using OKRs? Or is alignment the outcome of successfully using OKRs? I think it's the latter, but I'm prepared to have that discussion. So the book drawer is going to remain open throughout the presentation. So please go in and put your email address in. I'm going to get stuck into the presentation. And the book, of course, is on Amazon. If you don't win, please go and buy it. So look, it's 2021. We have to talk first of all about the virus. Before we go anywhere else, the virus, the Agile virus. The Agile virus was first identified about 2001, although there's good reason to believe it was circulating earlier. And it's clear now that the Agile virus is spread by digital technology. It began with software programmers who were the first people exposed to extensive digital tools. As other domains use digital tools more, they are infected by the Agile virus. Now, the Agile virus mutates like any good virus. We were dealing with different strains. It has self-modifying DNA. You're actually allowed to go and modify it. Now, this is good and this is bad, because if you've got a successful Agile team and you're doing retrospectives and all the other good stuff, you're improving Agile. You may start with what it says in the Scrum book, but a year later, you're doing something even better. However, you're also allowed to modify the Agile virus so that you spend 3 months doing requirements, 1 month drawing Gantt charts, 6 months coding, and another year debugging. And you're allowed to call it Agile. You're allowed to modify Agile for better and for worse, and there's no trademark on the name. So whatever you're doing today, you can call Agile. What we do see, though, is two clear strains of the Agile virus. One strain, which I was calling mild Agile, but I think we're better off calling it corporate Agile. And the other strain I would call radical Agile. Startup isn't the right idea here. This is more about teams that are rapidly changing, learning, evolving, and constantly rethinking what they do. So I'm going with the name radical for the moment. But it's the corporate Agile I really want to turn to first of all. Corporate Agile is the less severe form of the Agile virus. It's not quite asymptomatic, but in some organizations, it does appear to be a rather mild infection, and organizations live with it, mild form of Agile for years, and maybe make a full recovery back to waterfall in some cases. The corporate Agile, as a weakened form, it's usually better than what went before. The corporate Agile environment, organizations are better off doing this weakened form of Agile than they were before they adopted Agile, but it never quite fulfills the promise that was set out, and you get a lot of frustrated people who feel as though they should be doing more. Organizations in this area typically aim for a very high R number. They're looking to reproduce the Agile virus into as many teams as possible, as fast as possible. As a result, effectiveness, what I would call the E value, is often lagging. And part of this is because teams adopt standardized ways of working and variation is discouraged. So you can have standard ways of working. And if you discourage variation, you discourage learning. If you discourage learning, you discourage change. And teams are beholden to some elite group of Agile centers of excellence. So you commonly see 3-week sprints as a lot of standardization. Some places the magic number 7 is adhered to religiously. And it's also common in corporate environments that there's a lack of true autonomy with teams, and this may be because there's a lack of trust. There's still several layers of planning, still several layers of management, and in the extreme, there's still a fear of coding. We still want coding done as far away as possible for as little money as possible. These are common symptoms of the Agile virus in the corporate world. Why? Well, I'm sure most of you have seen the corporate virus, have your own answers why. And in some ways, it's simply a question of risk reduction. Big corporations, they're right to be risk averse. They often only want to adopt Agile when they see similar organizations such as themselves adopting Agile. And they really want to be advised by very large consultancies on how they should do it based on the work of other large organizations. And if your Agile is just copying other people, well, it's better than what went before, but you're not going to get that rapid learning, rapid feedback, variations and trials. There's often a fear of failure. Yeah, and I know we should rebadge failure as learning and all of that, but hey, we're all hardwired from a young age to be scared of failure. Can't blame people. I think there's often an a, an excess of planning. There's this faith in planning, which isn't always justified. And there's constraints of the wider system. The teams within the organization, the market, the organization resistant. These are all reasons why corporate agile exists. Ultimately, there's a lack of learning. Sometimes there's a lack of deep understanding. And specifically, there's a lack of unlearning. Adopting sprints, doing stand-up meetings, all of that is the easy bit. The difficult bit with agile is unlearning stuff. It's what you leave behind. If you keep all the documents, processes, standards that you have already, and you just add a whole bunch of agile ones to it, well, all you've done is made more work for more administrators to do. We need to pare things back. We need to unlearn things. So we have this corporate agile virus, and it's out there, and it's got some success, but really it doesn't reach the levels we wanted to. Partly because it's commoditization undermines the effectiveness and the competitive advantage. One of the results is a lack of motivation in staff. I mean, I remember the early days of Agile and extreme programming, and there's a lot of fun. People are really pumped up to try this stuff. Nowadays, it's just seen as another management fad. There's a lack of experimentation, so people aren't experimenting the way we'd like them to, because experimentation leads to learning. And again, in corporate agile, it's often centralized in a center of excellence. A lot of the administration processes we had before remain intact. So the result is that corporate agile is better than what went before, but it still fails to address many issues and doesn't live up to the promise that certainly I had of agile 20 years ago. So what do we do about it? Well, I think OKRs can help. And that itself, for some people, is a pretty radical idea, because OKRs descend from management by objective, which is an earlier strategic planning tool. And management by objective was a very top-down tool. And the obvious thing to do with OKRs is to use them as a top-down tool. The top management team set the OKRs and they're cascaded down the organization. And that conflicts with Agile, doesn't it? That conflicts with autonomy and devolved power. That idea of top-down orders for things to do, that's in conflict. But I think there's a way of interpreting OKRs and using OKRs which fits with Agile. And I think they perhaps represent an alternative to the project model. Wilson mentioned my Project Myopia book earlier on. And I think we still, particularly in organizations, not so much in startups, which are constantly changing, but organizations still need some way of coordinating these different moving parts. And the project model has filled some of that, not necessarily very well, but it's filled it. And I think OKRs are another way of aligning teams within organizations. OKRs, if you don't know the history, they originated at Intel and they spread to Google, which is where they've got a lot of publicity, but they're used by Bono and Bill Gates and Microsoft and others, and they're liked by consultants. So they aren't a difficult sell into organizations. Organizations like the sound of OKRs. And OKRs fit well with Agile. They're iterative in nature. You're probably going to do a 3-month, 13-week cycle with OKRs, set them at the beginning of the cycle, execute for most of them, get to the end, guess what? Review and retrospect and set some more. OKRs are outcome orientated. OKRs aren't about producing proxies. They aren't about measuring time spent. They are very much about how are you going to change the world? What is the outcome of this going to be? How will we move things forward? OKRs are also kind of test-driven. I sometimes think of them as test-driven management. You set out your objective and you set out your key results, which you could think of as a set of acceptance criteria. How are you going to look at that objective? How are you going to know it's going to be done? What are the smaller parts of that objective? So I think you can think of them as test-driven. And they support independent units. By allowing each team to have their own objectives around a common goal, they allow teams to go away and decide how they're going to work with this. So they can be used to drive authority down and empower autonomy. So OKRs also embrace failure. Famously, you're not supposed to hit 100% of your OKRs. You're supposed to hit around 70%, but your organization may set a different goal. So failure is an option. In fact, if you are always hitting all your OKRs, there's probably something wrong. So let me just pause for a moment before I continue. I'm talking about OKRs in Agile, and I've become aware as I dig into more OKRs, as I read more blogs, listen to more podcasts, that some of what I say about OKRs is different to what other people say. And the simplest explanation I can give you for that is that I'm specifically thinking about OKRs in an Agile environment. Now, as always, my experiences differ from other people's and your experiences, and you are quite at liberty to disagree with me on things. I think most of my disagreements with some of the other commentators on OKRs I've heard is that they aren't thinking specifically about Agile. You often read something on Agile, a book on Agile, and then at some point there's just a throwaway comment that OKRs can be used with Agile. But I don't think many of those authors have actually worked out the ins and outs of it. So word of warning. Okay. I think OKRs enhance team autonomy. In the old days, we would have a big boss at the top of the organization, and the big boss would decide what the objectives were. This is management by objective. And those objectives would be passed down to the middle managers. And the middle managers would pick them up and work out which bits of those objectives applied to them and their teams. And the middle managers would pass them down to their teams. And you get this cascade down. The people at the top know best. People at the top and work out what needs doing. And at each level it goes down, people at each level work out what's needed of the people below them and they're passed down. Management objective was popularized by the famous Peter Drucker, who later in life moved away from it. Management objective has a number of problems, one of which is this, that because it's a top-down planning process, you're dependent on very high quality managers at the top, very good planning systems, okay? If you go back about 40 years, the two biggest planners in the world were GE, and GE is not half the company it was 40 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. The other big example of planning was the Soviet Union. If centralized planning was ever going to work, we'd all be living in the Soviet Union now. So we know from Agile, we don't want centralized planning, we want devolved authority, devolved autonomy. So if you use OKRs as a version of management by objective with stuff cascading down, it's not very agile. The way I think you need to do OKRs is actually the opposite. It's bottom up. You still have your leaders and leaders who are there to set the destination, who are there to paint the picture, to talk about the shining city on the hill that you're all aiming for, to talk about the purpose and the mission of the organization. And they're still there to set out the challenges and the bigger goals and the ambitions. But then I think they step back. I think having laid out where they want to go to and what they want to achieve, they leave a void deliberately. And that is then for the teams to respond, because your teams exist. Your teams exist because we're all doing products over projects now. Teams exist for a purpose. And our middle managers are more likely to be in the teams. So the leaders say, this is our vision, this is where we want to go. How can you help? And the teams then respond. So each team comes forward and says, to move us towards this destination, this quarter, these are the things we're going to do. So the payments team steps forward and says, to reach that goal, we're going to change the payment system to whatever needs doing. The membership team step forward and say, this quarter, we're going to enhance the membership system to move us towards that destination. The sales team step forward, you get the picture. And the OKRs come from the bottom up. Yes, the leaders at the top still paint the destination, but it is for the teams to respond as to how they are going to contribute towards that mission. And so rather than think of an organization as top down or even bottom up. Think of it like concentric circles. Think of it like the solar system. Yes, your CEO is at the center of the solar system, or perhaps the center of the solar system is the CEO, the CTO, and the CEO, whoever, that those people for whom there's only one of them in the organization, they're the center. And some teams are closer in, some teams are closer to them, and some teams are further apart, geographically and business-wise. And the leader says, this is what we're going to do. And then the teams respond with their OKRs. And then the teams coordinate, perhaps with the leader, perhaps the teams go to the leader and say, this is what we're going to attempt to do. And you have a conversation. Yes, because the leader is a stakeholder. The leader is a customer for the team. The team have a responsibility to deliver on what the leader wants, but the leader is also a servant of the team, and the leader will have comments on what the teams are proposing. And the teams may have external customers, and they know best what external customers want. And the teams will know who they need to coordinate with. So the teams come up with their OKRs. This quarter we will do. And then they talk to the people who they work with, their stakeholders, and they may refine those OKRs over time. They may take more input and less input. It's not a question of who tells who what. It's a question of collaboration. So here's our leaders, and the leaders exist to support the teams. The leaders' goals really should be about performing teams delivering benefits. So, in my head, if the leaders got a set of leadership OKRs, those OKRs are all about supporting their teams. Yeah, they will support the teams, and they will measure how they have supported the teams, whether people are feeling supported, whether they're increasing psychological safety. There may be some other stuff in there, strategy, customers, who knows what. But servant leader model again, we're talking about the leaders. Once they've painted the picture and talked about the destination, they're then there to help the teams achieve what the teams have offered to achieve. So this brings us to the idea of purpose. The organizations aren't just things there to execute plans. In fact, one of the problems we have with corporate agile is it just seems to be about executing somebody's plan or somebody's backlog. And in 2021, in an age where more and more of our workforce or of a generation we call millennials, where we've just had this world virus, people are searching for purpose. And organizations need to give purpose. And organizations may have a single purpose, or they may have multiple missions which help them build on that purpose. And purpose is going to be largely invariant. The purpose of AstraZeneca is to develop medicines today, and it'll be the purpose of AstraZeneca to develop medicines next year and probably in 10 years' time. And the purpose of Vodafone is to provide, well, should I say mobile phone services, or do they see their purpose as bigger than that? It's communicating people. And within that, you may have missions like rolling out the latest generation of technology, like entering certain markets, withdrawing from certain markets. Missions are largely invariant, but they support the purpose. And then OKRs come along every quarter. So, we have our mission, go to the moon. We have our purpose, go to the moon. We have our missions, a series of space rockets. And every quarter, we're coming back and saying, for the next quarter, how are we going to contribute to the missions and the purpose? What will move us forward? And I think we even want to start with a clean sheet of paper. Pretend nothing exists. How does this team contribute to this mission? How does this team deliver benefit for the organization, for the mission, to build towards the purpose? And every 3 months we come back and we revisit that question. Jeff Bezos has this concept of day one. He said every day in an organization is day one. And this is similar. I'm saying this similar thing here. We don't want to be held back by our sunk costs or our partially done work, which is no longer relevant. Every time you set your OKRs, look at fresh at what you're doing. And this should supercharge our prioritization. If you think about a team, look, where does the work come from? Think about that for a moment. I bet 9 out of 10 of you thought of the backlog. We have the backlog and we're slaves to the backlog. Yes, And some of you will do work coming from a support desk, and the support desk may send in, issues today, tomorrow, 10 a day, who knows? And they may fit with the backlog, they may not. Some of you will be doing DevOps, and you've got to upgrade the Linux servers and who knows what. Some of you may be working with sales teams. Some of you may be working directly with customers. Some of you may have history. You used to work on a different team 2 years ago, and periodically someone from the old team comes along and says, please help us. All this work flows into teams, and we have trouble. What are our priorities? So then OKRs come along. And one way of interpreting OKRs is that OKRs are another input along with all these other things. You don't want this to happen. When teams take all their existing work and they add OKRs, where does the time come from? All you're doing in this scenario is adding to your work in progress. And we've spent the last 20 years learning that if we reduce work in progress, we increase throughput and we reduce lead times. If you keep all your other work inputs and you add OKRs on top of it, unless people are going to work nights, you're just going to get into an even bigger mess. So my advice is make OKRs everything. If you need to do support desk calls, if you need to operate a DevOps model, make sure that's reflected in your OKRs. If you need to deal with a sales team, customers, and past history, reflect that in your OKRs. Set these priorities. And if you're trying to take on extra work and you find it won't all fit, then something has to give. This is not a problem of prioritization. It is a problem which you address with prioritization by being able to say, hey, we've got a set of OKRs here. We've signed off on them for 3 months. Our stakeholders have signed off on them for 3 months. And that means there are some things that we are not going to do. We are deliberately putting on blinkers and we are not looking at some things. Now, okay, I don't want you to be completely blinkered. I want you to see OKRs as a prioritization tool, and I want you to try and stay the course and deliver your OKRs. But I'm also wise enough to know that if the house is burning down, you probably need to put the fire out, no matter what it says in your OKRs. I will say, though, if all you ever do is put out fires, then all you will ever be is a fireman. And in most organizations, most teams have an ambition not just to respond to customers and DevOps requests, but to deliver something bigger. So it's about getting that balance right. And I think OKRs is the place where you try and pull all of that together. I go as far as to say you make everything subservient to the OKRs. Don't get out of bed in the morning if it's not in your OKRs. And I think that comes a bit of a surprise to some people. And if you're awake, you're already saying, what about the backlog? We've got our OKRs. We've got the backlog. Shouldn't we be doing the backlog? But what do the OKRs say? And the truth is, it's possible for OKRs and backlogs to point you in different directions. It's possible to have conflicting goals, and you've got to decide what is the priority here. So my advice is you throw the backlog away. Basically, there's 2 ways of doing this. You can either say, we have a backlog, and the backlog contains all the work we think we have to do. And therefore, each quarter, we will look at the backlog, and we will decide from the backlog what our priorities are, and we will craft OKRs that reflect what is in the backlog that we plan to do in the next 3 months. So you make the backlog the primary source of work, and the OKRs are crafted to reflect what's in the backlog. The alternative approach is to take the opposite approach and say, start with a blank sheet of paper. How can this team contribute towards this mission? What do we need to do? What adds benefit? What adds value? And you say, oh, we've got the OKRs, we've agreed them, we've signed them off. And oh, we'll go rummaging in the backlog periodically and see if we can find any stories that contribute to this OKR. So you can keep your backlog. You just go look in there for some work that might help you with the OKR. But actually, if you've got the OKR, you can just sit there and scratch your head and say, right, what should we do to move forward on this OKR? And if you have an idea and it doesn't exist in the backlog and it seems like the best idea, you just do it. Just write it and stick in the backlog then. So I actually think when you work that way around, when you give the OKRs primacy and you make the backlog secondary or even third away altogether, you get a better result. I kind of know this because I did an experiment. Back when I was with this financial institution, we started to encounter this conflict, me and the other coaches of the teams. And I remember talking it over with one coach in particular. And we talked about these two approaches, and she resolved to craft the OKRs to fit the backlog. And I resolved to ignore the backlog and craft the OKRs. And 3 months later, when we got to the end of our OKR period, we sat down and we had another conversation, and she decided she was going to work the way I had, or rather the way my team had. So let the OKRs drive all the work. See your OKRs as a story generator. Your backlog is a big store of stories, but the other way is you have OKRs as a story generator. And every time you need more stories, you switch on the generator, you create some more stories, and you do them. So this way, I think we get away from the tyranny of the backlog. So many organizations in a corporate agile environment are slaves to the backlog. They're trying to burn this backlog down. They never burn it down as fast as is wanted, and the backlog only seems to get bigger and bigger. And actually, if you could do all the stuff in the backlog, that's probably a sign of failure, because you're not finding new, more valuable things to do than the things were thought of 12 months ago. So teams are slaves to the backlog. So I encourage you to move away from the backlog, craft your OKRs with respect to the purpose of your organization, your mission of the organization, and put the purpose above the backlog. Use the OKRs to reflect your purpose, revisit it every 3 months, and forget about the backlog. Think strategically. The backlog and stories are good because they're lots of small things, and small things are good at moving through an agile process and getting delivered soon. But if you only ever think small, you don't think big, you don't think strategically. So this is where OKRs sit. They're able to join up the small day-to-day sprints and the bigger goals, objectives, missions of the organization. Which brings us to the thorny question of success. What is success? Because success is not hitting 100% of OKRs. It says that in most of the books on OKRs. Although having said that, you and your organization is allowed to decide that you want to get 100% of OKRs. And I know certainly, I once sat in a meeting and I was asked, we outlined my team's OKRs and to another team that we were working with, and the other team said, which of those OKRs are you going to hit? What percentage of this are you going to guarantee us this quarter? And I said about 70%. And the other team exploded. The other team didn't see any point in setting OKRs if you weren't going to deliver 100%, because they were looking for predictability. Now, predictability is a good thing, but the way to achieve predictability is to aim lower. And OKRs are about trying to achieve more, trying to achieve higher. The theory in OKRs is if we aim twice as high and we only get 3/4 of the way to our goal, we'll still have achieved more than if we'd aimed for what we could safely hit. So aim higher. So achieving 100% of OKRs is not success. In fact, it's failure. It suggests that maybe you didn't aim high enough. So famously, Google aimed for 70% of OKRs. The problem with aiming for 70%, and why I don't consider that success, is you just make it more complicated to hit your target. If you really think about this, you can just put in OKRs that you're quite confident of hitting, and then just make sure that you miss a few of them. I think if we have a hard number like 7%, we can just game the system. Heck, we're software developers. We're pretty clever people. OKRs create focus, but focus alone is not a success criteria. It's one of the attributes we're looking for here, but it's not by itself success. And if you have too much focus, you can also go wrong. I've come to see OKRs as a hypothesis for what is needed. Every quarter, we sit down, we look at our mission, our purpose, we think about what we can do, we hypothesize about what will move us towards those goals, and then we try our best to execute against them. Ultimately, success is the outcome itself. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if you miss every one of your OKRs. If you are adding value, your OKRs are a hypothesis. They guide you, they create focus. It may be that in doing them, you see what you really should have written in the OKRs. Success is every quarter, your team adding value, creating benefit, advancing the mission of the organization, and yes, bettering society. So I think when it comes to measuring the success of OKRs, we need to take a step back. And yes, we can look at what percentage we hit, what percentage we miss, but we should also look at how they affected the team, how they benefited the team. And we should look at the overall outcome of pursuing those OKRs. Did it move us in the right direction? Did we benefit our stakeholders? Did we benefit society? Did we benefit our organization? So when it comes to success, we need to step back. We try and be very hard, very specific, very numeric in setting OKRs. But when it comes to success, we need to think more broadly. I'm actually pretty close to our time here. So to me, OKRs are about reawakening Agile, because I see great potential here to step away from this tyrannical backlog driven development that we see in organizations, to step away from standardization, to restore some of the fun, excitement, and experimentation to Agile by using OKRs, because OKRs allow us to write down big, meaningful things, talk them through with our stakeholders, some of whom are, yes, senior managers. And the OKRs then represent the service contract or the API for the team. The team has got its OKRs to pursue. It's within the team now to work out what is the best way the team can follow through on those OKRs to deliver value, to deliver benefit. And I see the potential here for OKRs to really empower teams. I hate the word empower, to be honest, to really enable teams, to give them the authority, to give them the direction, and allow them to do things in their own way. And at the same time, bring purpose back into development, not to get bogged down in our backlog. I think, yes, I was right. There were no slides after that. I'm going to take a breather, and then I need to find your names in the book drawer. Wilson, have you got the questions lined up?
Yes. Yes, I do. We have a few questions here. So let me just go through those. And this is quite very common. So we have a question here from Jonathan. He asks, I'm struggling to see a difference between the term OKR and team-owned KPIs. This sounds like a buzzword. What am I missing?
I don't really know, because I am not a KPI expert. But I know the last time I did this talk, somebody asked a very similar question. So I can give you my interpretation, but I think it may be different from what you have. I don't know how you've implemented KPIs. I see KPIs as a measuring tool. You're saying we've got this key performance indicator. We at the moment rate a 5 on this key performance indicator, and we want to move towards a 6. So I see and you can then add in, well, here's a target. Our target is 6. Now, yes, there's similarities. The problem with targets is we have a habit of missing them. So the first problem is KPIs, I think, are often a measuring tool. Secondly, when we use them as targets, we're not thinking of the ambition here. OKRs have this idea of ambition baked into them, which I'm not sure I see in KPIs. It may be different interpretations of KPIs. People are wanting to move towards KPIs with a certain degree of certainty. So that's the way I see a difference. All that said, if your KPIs are genuinely set by the team and the team are generally setting ambitious targets and the targets are not being gamed, because that's a big problem with targets, then maybe you've got a solution which is good, and maybe you don't need OKRs. Maybe you should just stick with it. I think the thing to ask yourself is how could this be better? So,
Okay. Thank you, Alan. If I may add, and I stole this from Philippe Castro, where he provides quite a very good. So he uses OKRs as the GPS where you want to reach the destination, and the KPIs are just the dashboards, that your dashboard on the car. The
yes,
temperature is okay, the fuel levels, all those things. If you see some of the KPIs um, getting getting red, you'd
yeah,
probably pause your journey, for
yeah,
example, to put some fuel on your car and
yes.
continue your journey, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
that analogy is very good. It certainly fits with my understanding of KPIs as a measuring tool. The issue is around if you are targeting KPIs, and if you get the book, bit of a sales pitch, there's a couple of chapters I've got in there on the problems with targets, because targets are not benign. Targets have difficulties. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's not one or the other.
Mm,
You can have OKRs and KPIs. KPIs are useful to see as a health check. How is everything going on? You don't want to improve something at the expense of something else. So that's why the KPIs are good to have that. Good. So next question, and this is from me actually.
yeah,
Does OKRs, in your opinion, Alan, does OKRs apply to all teams? Like some teams do work that is more BAU, such
yeah,
as
yeah.
operation. How does it fit in that
Hmm,
situation?
hmm. Okay. So for me, OKRs are very much a team thing. I know some people talk about setting OKRs on an individual level. As far as I'm concerned, the only OKR anybody needs is to be a good to contribute to the team. Yeah, if you've got OKRs that aren't pushing in that direction, then why have you got them? And then if you've got OKRs that are all about supporting the team, why do you need your own? Um, at the top of the organization, I could see the management teams might have their own set of OKRs, but my worry is they then become, you end up having the cascading down problem. Do they apply to like adjacent teams? I can imagine it both ways, to be honest. Um, if we've got like a service desk team and all they do is answer the telephone all day and take questions and answers, then arguably they don't. They're just doing business as usual. However, they could have an OKR to make answering the telephone better. They could have an OKR to reduce the amount of work they have. They could have an OKR to make more satisfied customers. So um, I, I I honestly don't know. I think I'm tending towards the view that you might want to try and set them for each team. Again, hypothesize, set them for the teams and run with them for a couple of quarters and say, are they making things better or worse? Um, when I was doing OKRs with this financial institution, we got the guide that OKRs weren't for business as usual. And the team I was with was a true DevOps team, and we had a lot of keeping the lights on work, we used to call it. And that's difficult to reconcile when you've got teams that have this very operational nature. And yes, you can write some OKRs around doing a better, keeping the lights on, keeping customers happy, but there's only so far you can do there. The organization at the same time is asking for new things, new projects, new deliverables. And it was that conflict that I struggle with a lot. In the book, I outlined several ways of approaching that. My favorite, and the approach I would use now in retrospect, would be to create an OKR zero, as I've taken to call it, which is the business as usual OKR, the stuff which isn't very sexy, but if we don't do, we're going to have problems. It's revenue protection, it's risk mitigation. And the reason I would like that to be in an OKR is it elevates it to the same level when others are reviewing it, when your senior managers, when your stakeholders are reviewing it. I think it's important to say, hey, in addition to doing all this new cool stuff, the team have also got to keep the lights on. And so I think it's important to elevate it. Now, I call it OKR 0 just to highlight that it's not particularly cool, but it's necessary.
Cool, thank you. The next question was from Chris, but I think you already replied to it. But his question was, how can you implement OKR in operation support systems, OSS teams, which again, I think it's very much related with the BAU.
Yeah,
BAU.
my interpretation will be, if it's not Chris, please contact me, drop me a mail.
Cool. And then we have from Catherine, agree with the concept that OKRs must be set from the bottom up and hold up to the organization vision and strategy. You couldn't have been clear, Alan. Okay, I think this is it. It's not a question. Yeah, I think it's just Catherine agreeing with it, because I think we still see situations where they are, as you said, the management by objectives, whereas you have the thinkers at the top, and they just cascading to the executors at the bottom without any feedback loop. And, and because as we know, the knowledge and in software development, we talk about knowledge workers, and what does that mean is that the knowledge is here at the very bottom.
Yes,
right?
And
they know more than the managers.
Yes, and I think if you were to ask me what is the key difference between vanilla OKRs and agile OKRs, I think it's this. When I read and hear other people talk about OKRs outside the agile context, I actually find it a bit ambiguous as to how much is coming bottom up and how much is coming down, top down. And some people definitely interpret them as a revision of management objectives. In the agile environment where we are striving for self-managing, self-organizing teams, and we're trying to devolve authority and power, I think the OKRs have to come from the bottom up. And I acknowledge that's a bit counterintuitive, but they then become a collaboration tool. Here's our API. Here's our test objectives for the quarter. How is this going to work with everyone else?
Mm-hmm. Very good. So next one we have from John, where he says, I've seen OKRs used to promote alignment through methods of accountability measuring. Any tips to actually decouple existing compensation incentives?
This is something else I talk about in the book. And I'm going to say I don't actually have any tips for decoupling. I think you just don't do it. I think I haven't read an author yet who promotes coupling OKR success to compensation, to annual reviews. I think there's a role for talking about with individuals, how they contribute to the team and contribute to the OKRs and how they relate to them. But I think coupling the OKRs to compensation, you are going to invoke Goodhart's law. If you don't know, Goodhart's law states that every statistical measurement, when used as a target, will change its behavior. And if you couple something like OKRs to a pay packet, look, I don't blame you. You're going to make sure your OKRs are set in such a way that you hit them and you get the payout. Having said all that, I've also observed that OKR is just too attractive to human resource departments and others who latch onto them and say, here's a metric we can use. So I'm very sorry, I don't have any tips for doing it, for not doing it. I think perhaps education of the people who are doing it and say, do you understand the behaviors you are incentivizing? It's also called the the law of unintended consequences. I wish I had some tips to do it, honestly.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I do feel, and especially when we work with agile teams, if we are going to incentivize and reward individual contributions, then how can we expect people to contribute towards a team?
Yes.
Sharing knowledge, for example. So yeah, I don't have the answer, but I've seen literature going to, okay, how to reduce, include the team collaboration, and how your contributions towards the team objectives,
Mm-hmm.
and have that having a higher scale, right, a higher
Mm-hmm.
scoring on your reward or whatever your evaluation. Or some companies just go and scrap monetary prizes to individuals, and rather they give maybe some money or perks for the teams, and decide how they want to use it.
Yes. Yeah.
But again, let's
Yeah.
and we have for Matt, finally, what is the best resource for examples of good quality OKRs?
Oh, examples of good quality OKRs. um, I think yeah, to reuse and overuse metaphor, OKRs are a journey, and I think yeah, I remember the quarters I spent with the team. Each quarter we created the new OKRs, and if I look back at the previous quarter's OKRs, I thought, you know what, they weren't that good. We didn't quite get it right. So I think you should always be improving and getting better. Um, there I have a wonderful collection of user stories I've stolen from clients over the years, and I use them in some of my training sessions. I have yet been able to gather a body of OKRs from the real world that I can use as good or bad examples. Um, good OKRs, I think they need to excite people. They need to have a purpose. They need to have meaning. They also need to be measurable at some level. In the book, I talk about the difference between what I call binary OKRs, which you either hit or you miss, and analog OKRs, where you can hit to a degree. So if your OKR says have 1 million new customers, you either hit it or you don't. If your OKR says have more customers, think of solutions to get to 1 million customers, and you word it in such a way that you can say, hey, we've got 800,000. That's a success in its own right. And it's not binary. And then teams can make the trade-offs as they go along, and they can apply Pareto principle or whatever as they go along. And you don't get into these cliff edge situations. So my main piece of advice would be think about whether you can word your OKRs as analog, and you can judge how much of a success they've been rather than binary yes or no.
Cool. Thank you. So I see that I'll just have some time for having some live questions. So I've asked people to raise your hand, and I'll unmute. Before that, if you need to leave, please do.
Well, shall I quickly do the book draw? I'll put the names in between all of this. If I can switch to my browser here, I found this wonderful website where so I've pasted everybody's name in here. So if I spin the wheel here, there it goes. Oh, Andy Bleach, I've got your email. I will drop you an email probably tomorrow now. And if you want the physical book, I'll post it. If you want the electronic, I'll email it to you. So if I move Andy and I spin it one more time for the ebook. Oh, that is Maru. Maru, I will drop you an email tomorrow, and if Andy doesn't want the physical book, I'll offer you it. If not, I'll send you the ebook. Okay,
And
thank
if
you.
nobody wants, I will want. That's fine. You can ship it to me, right? So, and before I just unmute Ricardo, please, if you need to leave, please provide feedback via the links I've provided, and the recording will be on the YouTube page, which I've already put on the chat. So let me just unmute. I think it was Ricardo, but uh, Ricardo, you can unmute yourself if you'd like.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Hello.
So, Alan, first of all, thank you for the session and the great book. In the one of the first chapters of your book, you talk about dependencies in OKRs. And in
Yeah.
fact, when you have a team with more than 100 people, there will be dependencies. How to eliminate these dependencies in advance? Thank you very much.
Oh, okay, the simple answer is give up on reusable code. uh, more self-dependence. If you've got 100 people, I don't tend to see 100 people as a team. I view them perhaps closer to maybe to use a football analogy, a squad of people. I would say if you've got 100 people, you've got sub teams in there. And I think I would be trying to think, look, there's some objectives the whole 100 people have, but the sub teams in there are going to have their own objectives, and they're going to set them out. And I think we need to get those different teams to talk to each other and to talk about what they need and the priorities are. And as I think you've already picked up on, I'm very keen on people spending more time eliminating dependencies rather than managing dependencies. Again, a lot of dependency management is a symptom you see in corporate agile. To eliminate them is really a question of trying to make teams more independent. So you could, for example, if you've got teams that produce common components, you could try and get those teams to try and think like open source developers, where they are making new releases. The team just chug along at their own pace. They listen to what their customers want. They make new releases, but they decouple themselves and they allow other teams to take their releases through pre-packaged channels. Another approach is genuinely to cut down on now those dependencies, those reusable components, and strip out reusable code. I know we're all trained at college to see reusable code as a good thing and a free lunch, but the fact is reusability costs. And every time, one of the costs you get is where teams are dependent on each other. And some of those dependencies can be eliminated if teams create their own things, if teams forgo the savings they get from reusing something from another team and they make an independent thing. Then there's a load of technical solutions, microservices and all of that, although they introduce as many as they remove, I suppose. Conversation as always. That's 3 or 4. Hopefully that will get you started. Wilson, you're muted.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Well, I don't have anyone else raising their hands, and we've just reached the time, so we are right on schedule. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alan, for coming once again,
My
and
pleasure.
you're welcome again in the future. The recording will be available as soon as possible in the YouTube page. Please provide the feedback and have a very good evening, morning, afternoon, whatever applies to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.